working at the Faculty of Music at McGill?
Building it, building the violin department. I started to travel around Canada, doing festivals. I went to Banff to teach. And I started to get my name around, and people wanted to come to study with me. And slowly I built what I consider was the finest string department in the country. So we had some really wonderful violinists studying there, and from all over. Because then, of course, as I started to travel internationally, I attracted students from Europe, from the States. So it took many years, but we did it, and we had a wonderful orchestra. The orchestra was fantastic, and of course it's still very, very good. I remember going to Carnegie Hall with the orchestra, and the New York Times saying it's the greatest university orchestra in North America. So that was a great challenge, and it was a wonderful challenge, and I enjoyed thoroughly meeting it.
What would you say is your approach to teaching?
You mean like a teaching philosophy?
Yeah, what is your philosophy of teaching?
Of teaching. Well, you know, I basically think that foremost you teach people, you don't teach the violin. I think that you play the way you are, and I think that you cannot separate violinistic and artistic growth from personal growth, emotional growth. And I think it all goes together, and I think that unless you're able to feel all the emotional, psychological sensations that a pupil brings into the room, aside from the physical sensations that he feels when he plays the violin, you're not really a pedagogue. You know, sometimes I feel how a student is going to play for me when he comes into the door, by the way he walks, by the way he looks at me, by the way, you know, I already feel if he's prepared really well or if he is not so well prepared, and, you know, so I think that understanding that and dealing with that in a constructive way is very important to teach the violin. But first you have to understand that people play the violin. And then you have to understand that you have to deal with each individual in a different way. There are no two individuals alike. And so you mustn't teach everybody the same way.
I read that you have what you call a student's time clock, and that every student has a different time clock. Tell me about that.
Yes, well, I feel, you know, that, of course, you give a lot of information to a student, and hopefully the student absorbs the information and elaborates, goes through the process of, let's say, digestive process of digesting this information. And sometimes I think a student will understand what you have taught him after he leaves you, not necessarily when he is with you. I know that some teachers sometimes get very offended if the student doesn't do certain things by the third or fourth year, say, that he's with it. I don't. I think that, of course, it would be wonderful if a student does everything that you tell him while he's with you and is able to develop it to its fullest potential. But it doesn't always happen that way. You know, one must have enormous patience to teach, to understand that the student doesn't always develop all the information you give him while you're teaching him. Often it can happen later on while he may be studying with somebody else and something clicks. And it also has to do with his own life experience. It isn't just a violin. Something may happen in his life that adds that maturity that he didn't have at that point to understand and develop that information. So one mustn't take things personally. That's very important to be happy teaching. I also feel that when a student leaves you after 4 or 5 years, if he remembers 100% of what you taught him, God help him, you know. So if he remembers 25% of it, it's enough. Then it means he has some personality, some individuality.
Now, what about, there seems to be a huge, in the last 20 years at least, emphasis on technique. Do you think that there's anything lost?
Let me tell you something. You know, the middle level of violin playing is higher than ever. You have more people today being able to play the violin very well, very competently from technical point of view than ever before. That is why getting a position in an orchestra is so hard. But I think, artistically speaking, we have suffered. We don't have violinists today, you know, in general, with the personality, individuality of people like Chrysler, and Elman, and Heifetz, and Menuhin, and Milstein. You know, that we don't have. The personality is it's not the same. The individuality doesn't come across in the playing the way it did before. I mean, you would turn on the radio, and after 2 notes, you knew it was Heifetz playing, or you knew it was Menuhin playing, or you knew it was Milstein. You see, it's very hard today.
What makes a great artist?
What makes you a great artist is the ability to communicate something that is very important to you, very meaningful to you on a gut level, not in the brain, but on a gut level in a very convincing way. You see, when you hear a great artist playing, at that moment you feel that there's no other way to play the piece. And that's not true. But at that moment you feel that because he's convincing you. It's so great that you're completely immersed in his performance, in his approach, in his interpretation. And today we don't have too many people like that. We really don't.
During his years at McGill University, Mauricio Fuks also guest taught at the Banff Center for the Performing Arts, the National Youth Orchestra, and he adjudicated around the country. His reputation as a pedagogue was on the rise. Then early one morning in 1987, Fuks received a phone call from one of his violin heroes who was visiting Ottawa.
The telephone rang and I said hello. I was still sort of sleepy, and he says, "Oh, this is Yehudi Menuhin," and I felt like saying yes, and this is Moses resurrected or something. I said, "Oh," he says, "Well, it's so nice to talk to you, and I heard so much about your teaching, and I'm coming to Montreal, and I would love to meet you, and can I be one of your students?" And I said, "Well, sure, of course," and it was arranged, and we met, and I took a very fine student of mine to play for her, and she played for him, and she played extremely well, and he was very impressed. And then he said to me, "Well, I've been looking for you for a long time. Will you come and teach at my school?" I said, "I'm very honored by your offer, but I don't know if I can come and live in England. I have a job here, and I like it here, and I have children and, family. I have everything." "Well, come for 2 weeks," he said. I said, "Why don't I come for 2 weeks?" And he was in New York, and he had 2 free days, and he flew over to England to be with me and watch my teaching. And he said, "Look, I am absolutely convinced now that I want you here to refurbish all of violin teaching here, because there were problems then in the school. They were getting, the kids were getting wonderful training musically, but technically the training was not good. And so he says, I want you to come and do this for me." So I said, "Let me think about it."